Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit. Hello, my name is Sarah and I'm the woman behind Arc Woman. Today I'm going to be interviewing a wonderful person called Miriam McCormack. She is a holistic psychotherapist and today we're going to be talking about the landscape of mental health, specifically women's mental health. Here I am sitting on a gorgeous Drift Surf Co. rug. It's owned and ran by a women team. They're amazing. One day, and they're an organization, which means the proceeds that go towards buying one of these rugs, gorgeous rugs, goes towards helping women get out of welfare, which means a transition from women's shelters into places where they should be and forming a beautiful life. They have a discount code at the moment. It's called Woman10, all caps, 1010. And you can buy it online at www.driftsurfco.org.
Are we rolling?
We're rolling. Woohoo! Hello.
Hi.
Say hi to everyone else.
Hello.
Where would you like to start? Because I've already introduced you. Your name's Miriam. You're a holistic psychotherapist and you function in the southwest of Tassie.
Yes, I do. Such a great place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you want to start with this conversation? Because usually I'd start with like why women got attracted to the field that they're working in. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, it's a bit of a funny story actually. I started off my career in agriculture. And I was studying social science within agriculture, so looking at farmer motivation and behaviour and learning. And then ended up working in research for development on international projects. And I guess had a few different jobs before and after that. And then I got to this point in my life where I was not feeling job satisfaction and I was feeling like I needed to take a new direction. And I looked back and realised that I had been the workplace counsellor in every single place I've ever worked and in a lot of social situations as well. And I I sort of was like, this is because I was doing a lot of self-development as well, and I was looking into my personality and a bit of astrology and things and looking at where my strengths were to try and help guide me in my next decision. And I was like, I'm sort of a natural counsellor. And I love spending time one-on-one with people and groups of people, and I love having deep and complex conversations. And I actually don't mind being inside a conflict that I'm not involved in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like,
No.
I love conflict.
No, I don't love conflict, but I don't mind being in between people in a conflict.
Has that happened in your practice before where you have two people who are having conflict and you're facilitating conversation and communication between them?
Not officially. I was in a mediator role in one of my jobs as a manager, but it was really hard and I didn't feel like I had the training or the support for it, which is also, I look back on that situation and I wish I'd known what to do. And so, all these things sort of came together in this big soup pot and I thought, this is really calling me, this listening space, this space of complexity and human emotion and depth and exploration of the more than everyday. And that really called to me. And so I decided if I was going to go back to uni, I'd have to study at an alternative place. It'd have to be an alternative institution, not a university. And found Metavision.
What's Metavision? Sorry, I don't know anything about how you've studied. So
I did a graduate diploma of holistic psychotherapy through the Metavision Institute, and they are based in New South Wales, and they only teach holistic psychotherapy.
And what is holistic psychotherapy? Because people
might have a bit of a grasp on what the word holistic means,
Yeah.
although it's kind of stretching its own realm at the
Yeah,
moment.
it is. And it's a bit of a buzzword too, to be honest. A lot of people are using it to describe things that are even just a little bit outside the mainstream.
Yeah.
Rather than what it's, what the word itself means is about heading towards wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking a view that is broad and encompasses the whole being. And psychotherapy is traditionally, the psyche, that's a whole nother thing, isn't it? Like,
we just have to break down the etymology. So holistic means you're taking into account the whole person. So their spirit, their mind, their story, and their body as well.
Yeah, the physical body is really
somatic
important.
Body. Yep, because the nervous system, it is the entire body. It's not just your brain and your central nervous system.
Yeah.
And then psychotherapy, what does that mean? I mean, therapy, we kind of understand what does psycho mean.
Well, yeah, I've got some interesting things about therapy too. Hey, but let's start with the psycho bit. Well, originally the psyche was actually the soul in Greek. Oh. The psyche referred to the soul, or the part of us that is the sort of, they were trying to describe the metaphysical part of us that is beyond the brain and the body. And it was the part of us that we tend through spiritual practice or through being in nature, or the things that are sort of, a bit more esoteric. But psychology has become more the study of the mind, which Western medical practice has sort of kind of reduced that to the brain and
pathology. And pathologizing people's experience with their psyche. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well, the psyche's been taken from this idea of the soul and this idea of the human, the non-understandable humanness, and pulled that into behaviors, the brain, the way that we respond to the world, sort of like how we fit into social structures and how we function in society. And that is problematic because it's trying to create a definition of what normal is and how it is to be normal in the world as a human. And it's also assuming that everything that's happening in society is totally fine and healthy and we should be able to function within that in a predictable way. Yeah. And that, I have a big problem with that, because that means that some people's reactions are wrong. It means that the way that some people act makes them sick. And it means that we have to treat everyone and try and make them to fit into those train tracks which we're currently on, which is modern capitalist society.
Which is fucking classic. Like, one of my clients is just like, she's had multiple occurrences of assault in multiple different forms. And she was like, my doctors just wanted to put me on antidepressant anti-anxieties. And I'm like, but that's what's the point in that? Like, you are dealing with a huge amount of trauma, and the system is kind of acting like you're the problem, and it's kind of gaslighting you into believing that you are, and that you should be able to healthily respond to huge amounts of trauma. Like, your body's responding as it should.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that we're being asked to respond rationally to events that are irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that our body and our mind and our being is doing is actually totally reasonable in those situations. Like, the things that your client is experiencing, totally reasonable, given what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that is completely, it's been suppressed, and now a lot of that stuff is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing a lot of amazing work being done in this realm. Bessel van der Kolk with The Body Keeps the Score. Gabor Mate is doing some beautiful work on trauma and the body and the mind's response to trauma. And then, even some of the stuff like Brene Brown's doing stuff about shame and vulnerability. Like, this work is amazing, and it's giving us a lot of information and a lot of insight into what is a very reasonable way for us to respond to things that have happened to us that, ideally shouldn't have happened.
Mm.
And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that in this realm because it helps us understand why people are experiencing what they're experiencing and then how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I love what you said about people are responding rationally to things that are irrational. And so the system that we have at the moment is kind of saying that we are irrational and everything around us is irrational. Is that what you're saying? Like, you should be totally okay with all these things happening around you. And you should be totally fine, but you're the problem. I'm just kind of thinking from like a perspective of women's health, because what I see all the time is women will blame themselves and will put so much more on themselves than they deserve.
Yeah.
Very often.
Yeah.
And they internalize lots of things and they blame themselves because they want to be, because, you know, we're emotionally intelligent creatures and we want to be self-responsible, but it's almost, we take it a little bit too far. And I feel like the culture that we're living in really exacerbates that problem. It almost depends on women having this problem and internalizing this.
Yeah.
Is that something you see in your practice with women?
Definitely, yeah. And I think, like, this may not be everyone's everyday reality, but we need to acknowledge that is the foundation of our current culture. And that classical psychology is saying these are normative behaviours. If you don't fit within that, then there's something wrong with you, yeah. And we also have the issue of the modern medical system not actually studying women. And you would know a lot about this, like not actually being able to understand what's happening in a woman's body, and we don't have the scientific information for that. And then we also have a culture that's suppressed the feminine and degraded the feminine. We see that with what's happening in the natural environment. We see that in the language that's used towards women. We see that in the way that the feminine is treated, even just on a very subtle level, like it's just undervalued. Or it's just dismissed, or it's just not considered as the main point of what we're all doing.
Yet we depend on women.
Absolutely.
We depend on them. Like men also have a huge place in the society, and you speak really passionately about this as well.
I do, yeah.
Mim is not any type of misandrist at all.
No way.
We love men.
We love the men.
We love you.
Yeah.
But yeah, the world goes round on women. Like I always hear, oh, like she doesn't work, but she's looking after the children. She's running a house. She's cleaning. She's doing all the groceries. Like this is the bedrock of our society, is basically women being at home and just copying it and not getting any slack whatsoever and being basically gaslit into thinking that they are kind of the problem and that they're a little bit psychotic and, you know.
Yeah, and it's very subtle and it's very kind of, yeah, it's not always overt in the way that it's kind of perpetuated, I guess. And this is the patriarchy, right? And like the patriarchy is bad for everyone. It's bad for men because they're also under the suppression of other men and they're also oppressed. And like it comes through differently. And I think this is where people get a bit caught, is that women experience like just horrific levels of violence and oppression under this system. And that is horrible. And also men are suffering as well. And the men that are perpetuating that are suffering as well. And I think if we're really going to get to the heart of this stuff, we have to actually see it holistically. And we just have to look at the whole thing. And it's complicated and it's messy and it feels overwhelming because it is. It is like that. But we have to be honest with what it is. We have to speak what it is. And I think that, like the people that come to see me, they have their own manifestation of these issues. And we have on a personal level what's happening on a societal level, right? Like people struggling with worthiness, with self-worth, with being themselves in the world, people who've experienced trauma and abuse and are struggling to move on with their lives or struggling with certain things that they really want to bring or do or be part of and they can't because of those wounds. Or, you know, things just keep coming up because they're ready to come up and then it's time to be with them. And as a culture, we don't have a collective way to work through trauma. We don't have a collective grieving process. We don't have the social structures that you see in Indigenous cultures that support people to move through these rites of passage as they happen. And so we see this thing of individuals having to deal with it on their own, and then also some generations not being able to process it, and the kind of build-up effect of that happens until there is a generation that has the space, the time, the capacity, the willing, like the ability within that to process all of that.
Yeah.
That's not people's fault. No one's done anything wrong. This is just where we're at now because of how history has played out. And the great thing is that we have the ability to work on this at any time, basically.
Yeah. Then that's what you were saying before, that we do collectively have a bedrock of trauma, and it's no one's fault.
Yeah.
But it's there, and we can't avoid it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's causing everyone pain. And you can point fingers and you can be as misandrous and say it's the fucking patriarch and do it, whatever you want, because whatever's hurting you is also hurting everyone else as well.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way out of this mess but through it. And I guess that's probably where your work comes in.
Yeah. And I think that, like, well, we know why. It's because of colonial capitalist social structures that have been able to rise to power. And there are a very small number of individuals who are perpetuating those on purpose for personal gain. I do believe that. But we can go down that rabbit hole. But there's plenty of other podcasts talking about that. So let's come back to this, because what we can actually do is work on the individual level, right? Or within, you know, a small collective social structure of our friends or family or whatever is around us that we can trust. And so, yeah, we can work on this within ourselves, and doing the work that is coming up for us is part of that collective healing process as well.
So what is that? Like, what exactly is the work? Retrospectively? Can't remember the Lee word. But, like, I hear that word a lot, the work.
Yeah.
You have to do the work.
Yes.
Do the work. And it's just kind of like, I've heard lots of people say, that builds resistance, because, like, I don't want to think of it as work. I want to think of it as something else, and I kind of do agree with that. But I hear this, it's almost as clickbaity as holistic.
Yes,
it's
totally.
like,
it is. And actually, maybe we want to drop that.
Yeah.
Because, like, it does, because of the connotation of work in our society, it sounds horrible.
Don't you think it's funny that we've applied do the work to something that work has created?
Yeah, and, you know, it also feeds that part of our mind that feels guilty if we're not being productive. And so we can let ourselves off the hook that we're not contributing to capitalist society if we're doing work in another area. And I wonder if that's where it's come from, of, like, trying to validate it within this paradigm.
Well, like, I will allow myself to go to therapy. I will allow myself to go to yoga. I will allow myself to eat my greens powder in the morning because I'm doing the work.
Yeah.
And it's like, why can't you just do it because you love yourself?
Yeah.
And I am seeing this soft girl movement at the moment. Have you seen this, the soft girl movement?
No.
It's like women kind of moving away from capitalism, being like, no, I don't want to be a boss girl, babe. I want to plant a garden and have ducks. Like, can we all chill?
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to self-love now. And it's kind of, maybe the work was a transgression towards maybe just, like, unconditionally self-loving ourselves, and unconditionally giving ourselves what we need because we love ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's ideally where we'd want to be coming to this work.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I say work because it's my job as well. So that's a whole nother thing within that. But I guess from, like, a personal perspective, going on a journey into those deep parts of myself, I see that, you know, we're carrying a lot of deep emotion, and different people have different versions of that. And to be able to be with those emotions and allow things to emerge and create space in your life for that to come up. That's what I mean when I say do the work. is to, like, let's commit collectively to being present with these things it's being present with these things that we feel deep inside ourselves. And I don't even want to use the word wound or trauma or healing, or because those words have so much baggage, and they also have been co-opted as well. And they've also become quite flippant in like, oh, that's just my trauma. I get road rage because I have trauma. It's like, well, probably yes.
People say that. People will be like, oh, that's just my trauma. Oh, that's a trigger. And it's like,
yeah,
well, we need to find another word for work, but you need to work on that. Like,
well, do we though? Do we need to work on it?
I would argue, yeah, that you do need to for your own self-worth. Like, if you really feel like it's going to be, I don't know, it depends on the person's value. For myself, if I was getting road rage every time I was on the road, I would be like, I need to work on this because this isn't good for my mental health. This isn't healthy for everyone else around me. And it's actually quite dangerous from that perspective. So, yeah, I would argue from my value system, yes, but I can't speak for everyone else.
Well, I think that when a deep emotion comes to the surface, that is a doorway. And that is something that we can follow. So, yeah, rather than this idea of there's a problem, we need to work on it, we need to fix it, something's coming up in my life and it's an opportunity for me to explore and to understand and to be with something. And maybe it's anger or maybe it's something else. So, yeah, that's how I'm trying to see it now.
Okay, yep, that's beautiful. And now I see it as like a doorway into yourself to be like, why am I angry? Why am I having road rage? Oh, it's this.
There's a message for me because a lot of the story is not in our minds. Most of the story is in our bodies. And that's something else we can talk about because, yeah, we are in the paradigm of the head. The head is up here and the body is just something that moves us through the world and gets us around, and they're a bit detached.
But they're not.
Absolutely not. It's definitely on there, I think.
So that kind of brings us into the somatics of what you do and the holisticness of what you do. Because we do think that we are just running around in our head and our spinal cord. It's just all our central nervous system. And that's what Wim Hof says, the issues are in the tissues.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, it's all there. And I've had experiences like this before. I remember when my tantra teacher was like, when you massage your yoni, she's going to start speaking to you. I was like, are you fucking insane? Like, she's going to talk to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I, like a good student, I did it anyway. And I went down there and I had all of these memories bubble up of like things that were not consensual, things that were not okay, even to myself. Yeah. I remember thinking and remembering of times when I went down there and like made myself come, even though she definitely did not want to. And she brought that memory up from years ago and was kind of like, I constituted this as rape. You raped me. Or like you assaulted me. Like my own body part speaking to me and being like, this is what you did. And this is why I'm numb, because I resent you a little bit. And I was just like, I remember calling my tantra teacher and being like, holy fuck, my vagina's talking to me. She was like, what did I tell you?
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember that. Issues are in the tissues. And when I tell people that, I can see it in their eyes that they're having the same complex that I did.
Yeah.
And you're probably experiencing that as well a little bit in your practice. You're like, oh no, like your trauma's in your body. They're like, no, it's not. But it totally is.
Yeah, there's definitely a deeper understanding of that now.
Yeah.
And the body keeps the score has been huge for that. Like people have done work on that before and after, but Bessel van der Kolk really got it out there in a big way into the mainstream. And the work that Gabor Mate has done as well on addiction and trauma is huge for this. And what the work that, you know, and these men, they have huge teams behind them and they have partners and they have, like, everyone around them has done this work. And I'm so glad that it's in the public now. I'm so happy to be alive at this time when it's out there. It's very exciting. And it's been, it's been massive for me personally and also in my practice. And it's really, one of the big things that comes up is around, like, this idea that your body can speak to you, and the mind that has, like, our brains that have been taught in a very verbal and what do you call that? Wow, it's just gone. Just no, like a very much a academic education. Like our academic is written and it's oh my god,
it's pathologized. We've pathologized and we've academia and we have intellectualized.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Our culture is very intellectualized and everything is very academic. And so to say that the body can speak to you, I think a lot of people take that quite literally, thinking that they're going to hear a voice come out of their body.
No, really.
And, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I did. I was like, oh, what? Is my body going to start, like, talking to my brain? But what that sort of means your body can talk to you is that when you connect to those parts of yourself that are holding the tension and the memories and the things that are unprocessed, is that you do start to have the memories. You do start to have the feelings. Oftentimes people will feel like they're in it again, like they're currently in it again. And that is fucking scary for sure. It's intense. It's hard.
Do you say that the only way out is through? I've heard that a few times and I'm just not sure, because there is the risk of re-traumatizing. Like, is that, I've heard that term associated with, like, if you're doing, we need to find a new thing. If we're doing self-love, which is the work.
Yeah.
And you start to feel like you're experiencing this trauma again, then the only way out is through. You kind of need to experience this feeling on its way out. I've heard this thrown around in the, holistic psychotherapy world a little bit and the somatic world a little bit. Is that a term you disagree with or you'd like to nuance? Because that's something I hear a lot. I'm just curious.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about it. Like, you don't have to be going through it on the same level as it was in the first instance. Mm-hmm. But if it's stuck in your body, it has to come out. And it will have to be felt on the way out to a point. Like, I know some people who say, let the feeling out, don't go into the story. And I sort of tend towards a bit of both, because the brain and the mind, it needs a story in order to make sense of the world. We have evolved as narrative beings, whether that's through oral storytelling or written word. We understand the world through story. And our brain needs to have a story in order to relax, in order to be in a place where we can be in that sort of rest and digest mode. Mm. And when we have trauma, we go into fight or flight. Like
parasympathetic and sympathetic.
Yeah, right? Yep. So that's the scientific explanation for what's happening. And when we're experiencing a threat, we go into fight or flight, freeze or fawn. And then if that threat isn't released from our body, every time we feel something that reminds us of that threat, we will go back into...
Or you hear a song, or you smell something, or you taste something.
That's what I mean.
Yep.
So if something happens that reminds you of that moment that is stored in your tissue memory, you will go back into fight or flight, freeze or fawn in that moment. And that's what people mean when they say, I'm triggered, is you're being reminded of the same event that is still stuck inside you. Mm-hmm. And Kimberly Ann Johnson describes this awesomely, actually. She talks about when you see, like, if you've ever watched a nature documentary and you see a gazelle get chased by a predator and it escapes, and immediately after the threat has passed, it shakes, like it does some kind of physical movement, and that is that animal releasing the fear and the anxiety and the, oh my God, I'm about to die, from its body. Mm-hmm. And as humans, we tend not to do that in this culture. And so if you think about all those moments in your life where you've been the rabbit or the gazelle and you haven't had a shake, or and I'm talking figuratively here, like you haven't had that release of the emotion immediately after, those memories are going to be more or less inside you.
Yeah.
Like,
it's kind of like Bessel in the body keeps score. which is an incredible book if you haven't read it. This one story stuck out to me about 9/11. Do you remember this part of the story where he said when 9/11 happened, the psychiatric centers in New York held this very short symposium, and they said, okay, people are traumatized up the wazoo. We need to get it sorted, stat. So they got thousands of health practitioners, specifically in the mental health sector, housed with officers, with assistants, ready and waiting. No one showed up. But gyms and yoga studios and ashrams were filled to the brim. It's because people, I think, innately understand. And then after that, I think about 10 years after 9/11, they did qualitative analysis, and they asked people why they chose yoga instead of going to therapy. And they said, because it wasn't in my head. It was in my body. And so people do understand this. I just don't think they understand it on a conscious level. And I think it's really important to understand that, like, you need to shake. Like when I feel anxious in the morning or anytime, I literally shake my body. It doesn't matter who's around. They might think I'm fucking strange. I don't really care. Because, I feel like I've been chased by a bear, and I need to let my body know that we're safe.
Yeah. And it's great. Like, as much of that stuff we can do as regularly as possible is great. And then there's also, like, you know, maybe something happened when you're a kid. Or maybe something happened to you where the trauma was so prolonged that you were stuck in that state, in that survival state for such a long time. Or maybe there's something that is so shameful that you feel like you can't process it in our society. And so or there's something that you didn't realize had made you feel like that, because that feeling got shut down immediately because it was too much, or it was not appropriate, socially appropriate, or whatever. So, like, this is what I'm talking about, is this stuff that gets stuck because it can't be processed, and it's not because we've done anything wrong or we haven't done our proper practices after that, and like, even in a society where there's less trauma happening, or, you know, people are being protected, it still happens. And there are collective ceremonial ways to release that and do the movement, and there's dancing and there's song and there's ceremony around releasing these things on a regular basis. And I think that is something that's really important for us, is to build in the regular physical release into our lives so that we're continuously moving that sort of stuff out of our system. But when it comes to this deep stuff that's been in there a long time that really scares us, that really needs a strong container to hold it. And I think this idea of re-traumatizing, that can happen when something starts to come out and that process is not properly supported. That's where I see that. Yeah.
So if you're going to be doing this self-love work, if you have experienced huge amounts of trauma, like, building a strong community around you who can deal with the fallout. Not the fallout, I would say. But
I wouldn't call it fallout. I'd just say that it can be really intense, and that it's really, ideally we have people around us who can understand that and support us, and don't need us to explain the whole thing to them. Ideally, we have someone who can stick with us through that process. So, like, it's great if you have a therapist that you trust, or somebody who's willing to do that work, to companion you through that work, and understands what, you know, the concept of what you're going through, what you're doing, and why.
So what would you recommend that people do? Specifically, what do women do? Because I understand that, like, the male and the female brain and psyche are, like, more similar than they are different, for sure. But I think the differences between them are that cause such a cascade of different reactions and beliefs and values that they may as well just be two different brains altogether. What would you recommend, and what do you see usually in your practice with women, and, like, how would you recommend women move forward if they have significant trauma, or if they have something they need to work on? Like, what are some just, like, general things that you would say, like, that you need to start doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's really depends on the individual to a big extent. First of all, I would say do what you're drawn to. So, like, if you have an intuition or a feeling about what modality or something that you might want to start with, and that might come to you in a strange way, like you might see a poster and go, I have to do this, and not know why. Or maybe you think, yeah, I want to see a therapist. Yeah, that's it's a great place to follow where your attention is leading you, because that will generally lead you to the place where it's good to start, and it will lead you to the place that's best for you. If you're not feeling that, you don't know what I mean, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I don't want to tell everyone to go out and get a counsellor, because that's not for everyone. And it's also like, we don't need to look for these things. Like, we don't need to look for the problems in our lives. If something's coming up, great, go and work on it. But if you're just living and it's great, do that too.
Yeah.
Like, things are going to come up in our lives, and it's great to give them attention and presence. And if they need support, do it. And if you've experienced a high level of trauma, you're going to be having stuff coming up more. You're going to have more triggers. It's going to be harder for you to be out in society. That's just how it is. It sucks. And yeah, it's good to be able to find someone who can support you to move through that process, so that you can integrate that into your experience of life.
It's so interesting, because as I'm listening to you, I'm like so aware of how I've been warped by society, because I'm like, okay, we have a problem, we need to fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, well, if it comes up and your intuition's telling you need to go learn the drums, then go with that one. Yeah. And it's just such a different way. It's such a gentle and kind and motherly way of dealing with the so-called problem. Like, even the way my mind is thinking about it, problem, something to fix. And I'm just like, it's just making me very aware of like, wow, like our whole society thinks about ourselves this way, that we have problems that we need to fix, instead of like, what would your alternative to that be? That we're just people on this earth that have just things, and everyone has a thing, and whether you want to work on it and how you work on that is completely up to you in that period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I reckon that's pretty good summary.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, I guess like, let's get a bit more practical, because I realize this conversation's been a bit. But yeah, okay. So what's good for us? What's good for our health? And like, what's good for our mental health? Because our brain and our mind are only one part of the equation, and even to say that is still reductionist. I've been listening to some stuff lately saying that there's a bigger neural network in our gut than our brain.
And that's where all of our serotonin is released. That is the precursor for melatonin. Like, there's no separation between the two. And even the vaginal neural complex and the mind are completely inseparable as well. And when I tell women that, they're like, there's a brain in my vagina. I'm like, yes. There's also one in your heart and in your liver. And
our heart has its own central nervous system.
Yep.
So that's what I mean about, it doesn't really matter where you start, because if you're having gut problems, go there. If you're having sleep problems, go there. You know, like, that's where the doorway is.
Would you say that, because this is something that I see in Taoist philosophy a lot, and I also saw this in my own life. I was getting recurrent UTIs and thrush, and I had a significant amount of trauma in my pelvic region. And when I dealt with that, and I stopped dating someone I shouldn't have been dating, it went away. And so I think there is like the neural connection to the body is like so significant and profound. So would you even go to say, like, if you have back problems, like, this is probably what you'd be going to. I see a lot of people saying, like, if you have anger problems, it's your liver. Have you seen this before?
Yeah. I try not to be so specific to say that this is this, because, but yeah, I have seen that. And often people, like, part of my technique is to work on physical symptoms and to go to that part of the body and see if the sensation or the problem is is linked to a specific issue or a specific memory. And that's part of finding out the story of the body.
And then what do you do so say I come to you and I have a sore liver and I have anger problems. What would we be sitting down and doing? Is your practice like hands-on? Is it talk therapy? Is it you're just deeply listening to someone? Is it all of those things?
Yeah, I usually don't touch people unless it's a very specific situation. But we start with talk therapy because that's a very recognizable gateway for a lot of people, is to start talking. And then often we do like some guided breath work or meditation, which takes us into the body to focus on those areas, and then we see what comes up. And that's like, what's your liver saying? It's like we bring our attention to the liver and see what emerges. And if you start to feel angry, then we amplify that emotion so that it starts to change subtly. And then we can observe the changes, and then we can follow that, and it will take us normally to the root of that anger or the root of that issue.
And then what do you do with that root of the anger? Is it a story, a memory, a feeling, all of those things?
It could be anything. And it depends what it is. And once we can see that, we can just be with it and let it express itself. And maybe there's a deep emotion that needs to be felt. Maybe there's a story that needs to be told. Maybe there's a feeling or something that it is wanting or craving, like some kind of soothing or something, or revenge, or, you know, whatever it is. I'm not advocating revenge or violent action at all. But I think one of the great things about the technique that I use is that it really gives permission to fully express an emotion.
Okay, you're here and I feel you and I love you anyway.
Yeah, and just
you're okay to be
if
here.
you're angry, just be angry. Yeah. Just be as angry as you need to be.
Okay, so that opens up another portal into women just not feeling anger. Like I have this thing with female rage. There is so much female rage, but we are not allowed to feel it. And you see it in movies, just like the perfect teardrop. But it's just, that's not females at all. Shiva and Shakti, I have the power to create you and fucking destroy you. Yeah. There's nothing like female rage, and you just don't see it. And I feel like it's making women sick.
Absolutely.
Like not feeling this emotion, and not feeling anything but happiness and contentness.
So yeah, now we see really high rates of autoimmune disease in women. And those two things linked.
Yeah.
The suppression of emotions and the body attacking itself. And it's really sad.
It's quite significant from like even a poetic level.
Yeah.
Because your body is attacking itself. Like, why is your body attacking itself? So there's almost like an element of self-loathing there, and like not wanting to live, and your body's like, okay, like, cool, like this is a really sophisticated way of self-destruction.
Yeah, I think it's really great that we have this research now, and I think that is the power of scientific research, is that it brings a knowledge that is very, very much venerated in our society and allows us to talk about things in a way as there is evidence for it. But yeah, the other thing that it really brings up for me that I find really interesting is that, okay, well, emotions aren't just things. Like they're not invisible things. They actually have a physical manifestation in the body. They're actually alive. And if emotions are real things, not just like it's in your head or whatever, then that changes everything.
And I like what you said before. We have evidence. We have scientific evidence. It's like we've always have evidence for it, but now we just have scientific evidence. And it's pretty sad that we need like a piece of paper to be like, oh, like feelings are things. And everyone's like, oh, okay, cool. Feelings are things.
It is deeply frustrating for me to be a sensitive woman in this culture and to have to always draw on the rational, empirical data to back up what we know is true and what Indigenous cultures all over the world, many unbroken lineages, are still saying today. And that's where humans have come from, is that place of relationship with the earth, relationship with plants, non-human beings and having a reciprocal and more than human experience of life where these things are real. Spirit is real. Emotions are real. These things exist within that. They have a role. They have a place. They have expression. And that is actually a place that we've all come from. Even as Europeans, our lineage has been broken by colonization and by various empires that have taken people away from the land and from their earth-based traditions. Yeah. But we all have that memory within us. We all have that potential of relating to ourselves as holistic beings in relationship with the earth. And we have that potential to relate to each other in that way too. And I think there's a huge kind of longing for that connection and that return to, that's what I see as wholeness. That's what I see as a healing pathway for humanity. It's not perfect. It's not utopia. It's a way for us to be in relationship. And relationships are hard. We know that.
Yeah.
They take work. They take work, and they take dedication and commitment and, being with our own discomfort and being with things that are not easy and not comfortable. But they can be so beautiful.
And it's worth it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing about doing this work, is that you are worth it. You're worth putting this effort in. You're worth possibly feeling these feelings again and these things coming up. You're worth it. And you can do it. And ultimately what you're saying is connection to self, connection to community, connection to everything around you. And there is no separation. This perspective of separation, I think, is what coins maybe Western pathology of mental health and mental wellness, and holisticness and non-separateness. And almost seeing that as almost Maya is what you're talking about in this, what has been a very, very holistic conversation.
Yeah, we've definitely gone to a few places. Yeah, definitely. And I think that, that to me is what this work is about, is that repair of the relationship within the self, so that we can go out and be in deeper relationship with each other, the earth, the plants, the animals, the things that we want to connect with. And it's not a linear journey. No. And it's not I've done 10 years of therapy, there's nothing wrong with me, or everything's perfect. It's not like that. It's a process, and it's a continual learning, and it's all part of that returning to the place where there isn't a separation between the mind and the body.
And it never ends. I think that's the thing. People think, okay, I've gone to therapy, I'm taking my vitamins, I'm exercising. When does this end? It's never. It's not the purpose of you being here. You're supposed to be here to feel. I think that's what my friend Tali always says. She was like, I deeply believe that this realm has been created for us to feel it. And I feel like what doing this work is really good for is it because it cleanses these senses. So you can actually sense and interact and communicate and commune with the world around you, because that's what you're here to do. Ultimately, you're not here to be in a human school and learn and self-ascend. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. But I just don't think that's what it's about. I think it's here to actually just be in commune with everything around you. But if you're deeply traumatized and you're avoiding these feelings inside of you that are screaming for you to be felt, and if you don't feel them, they will manifest in autoimmune disease, or with me, liver disease, or different things like that. You will have to look at them eventually. There's no way out of it. Your body wants to feel, and it's going to do everything it can to do so. Yeah.
And there are as many different ways as there are people. And I will just say actually that please do not replace medical attention with psychotherapy. Do not replace getting physical attention.
Do both.
Yeah, please do both. Because once the physical has started, it can't just be resolved just with therapy. So please make sure you get the support you need. And all good therapists will ask you, if you're having a symptom, they will ask you if you have followed it up. And yeah, I think the other thing is that, you know, we do have to be gentle with ourselves, because once we sensitize ourselves and come into that community, this is actually a very painful society to live in.
Yes.
And we have to recognize that it's hard. That is the hard part for me, is to be a sensitive person. And there are some places that I don't go, and there are some relationships that I don't engage in because of that. But also, we have to come to terms with a couple of things, and one is we have to start being okay with discomfort. We have to accept discomfort as part of life and find a way to be with that isn't pain. And the other thing is to find the ways to do this, to love yourself that you enjoy. Like, find the self-love things that bring you joy and that really fill you up, because that will keep you going. Like, when we say it never ends, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed and just kind of disillusioned and feel like, oh, I'm fucked and it's never going to end. Like, I mean, no. Yes and no. I mean, yes and no.
Yes,
like,
you're fucked, but it's everyone is.
No, no one is. That's the thing. There's nothing wrong with us. This is just where we're at.
Yeah.
And we can come to accept that, and we can find the ways that bring us joy. And, you know, I know you've had Carlin Digitalis on here talking about pleasure, and she says the pleasure is the antidote to suffering. Like, great. What is your pleasure? What is your joy? Because humans are also here to feel all that good shit as well.
So I just wanted to circle back from that and talk more about women in community and how they move through their phases, because to me it's very obvious that women move through very obvious phases of growth. So you're a child, and then you get your first menses, and you're not so much of a woman just yet, but you're definitely a maiden.
Yeah.
And then maiden to mother, and maiden to matriarch. Like, there are such obvious movements throughout these, and we used to have traditions and celebrations, and I feel like for the most part it is coming back, at least in our communities and our circles. But men also used to have these too. That's a different conversation. But like, when you're becoming a man in Indigenous culture, just anywhere in Australia, they're like, let's go for a massive walkabout. Like, you need to go through this period of pain, and that comes back to what you were saying before. Like, don't avoid the suffering and the pain, because it's a portal in a way.
Yeah, well, initiation is not comfortable because it's a death of the old self to an extent. Like, we always have those parts within ourselves. There will always be a part of me that's a child. There will always be a part of me that's maiden. And sometimes I let those energies run the show in an appropriate setting. But
Thank you for pointing that out.
yes, just in case it wasn't obvious. But initiation is not meant to feel nice and easy, because it's bringing us into a new self and a new role in our lives and our communities.
It's almost tempering of the spirit in a way. And the psyche. That's how I think of it.
It's definitely the ego. It definitely smashes the ego, which is a good thing occasionally. Like, the ego gets a pretty bad rap in modern speak of like, and it's got a bad reputation. Like, ego is kind of almost an insult.
Oh my God, we're so obsessed with ascending our ego. But it's like, well, if you're gonna dissolve if you don't have that.
Well, it helps us navigate society.
Yeah.
It's really important to help us move through the world. But if it's in charge all the time, it prevents growth, and it prevents the other parts of ourselves from doing their thing and being a whole balanced being. Yeah, it gets in the way for sure.
So it's almost, I'm imagining it as ego is like this specific plant. Say it's mint. Ego is mint in the garden. Because it's prolific. Anyone who isn't gardener, if you just plant one seed, you will have mint for the rest of your life, and it will overtake your entire garden if you don't take care of it. And it kind of crowds out other things. So how I'm thinking of it is like,
I don't want to put that on mint though, because mint is great and it has a beautiful
No hate
role
to
to
mint.
play. Like,
but you see what I mean?
none of this is good and bad, and that's the sort of dualistic trap that we can get into with this.
Okay.
Is that some things are good and some things are bad. It's
Mint's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Too much of mint is not good, because then other plants won't grow. Yeah. So it's almost like these portals of like suffering and pain that women naturally go through are almost like a natural way of cutting back the ego a little bit and being like, hey, meat pack suit, human psych, floating rock, expanding space, keep it together.
It's a humbling experience.
Yeah.
And that allows us, it allows us to grow into a new version of ourselves and keeps those things in balance. And I feel very lucky as a woman to experience those natural physical things. I don't have to go out and seek them as much as I would if they weren't happening within my own body every 28 days and beyond. So I think, but also women aren't supported in those initiations in our society. So we see a lot of young women coming into themselves with a lot of insecurity about their bodies and a lot of issues in that realm. And then we see young mothers who are very isolated and exhausted and feeling so tender and abandoned by our society, and often ending up like not part of society, because even though they're doing the most important thing ever,
making all the people.
Yeah. And then women go through menopause and they become irrelevant.
Because they're not sexy anymore and you can't have babies anymore and you're not productive for capitalism. So
and they've got stretch marks and saggy boobies. But they're at like their peak power.
Yeah.
And we're having like women in that stage, they're done with the bullshit. They're ready to move through anything that's left. And they've got vision and they've got
it. Distracted. Their brain isn't filled with sex hormones anymore. Yeah, and they can move forward and be like, this is my vision, this is how I'm going to get here. And, if I'm going to be honest, I remember seeing and interacting with women who are postmenopausal when I was young and thinking less of them as well, just because I'm a part of this society and I'm a product of it. And now that's completely changed, and I see them as like these powerhouses that should be running the country, should be running the world, honestly, because they're just so clear and they just want the right thing and they're so passionate about their community. So like how I see it usually is like, the child always thinks of themselves, because really they're developing themselves as they grow throughout this world, and they also care about their close community and their own world. And then the maiden, what do you think the maiden represents?
Yeah, well, it's kind of that sort of youthful, like building fertility. And I don't know, I actually kind of struggle with the maiden archetype a bit, because it's really presented as like this airhead bimbo in my experience of like this young woman who just is like, free as a bird, but also just a bit of an idiot. And I'm a bit like, oh, there's something there for me.
Okay.
That I need to unpack later, maybe.
Alrighty.
But yeah, what do you see in the maiden?
What do I see in the maiden? I see her as like discovering herself and the world around her and forming herself as an individual outside of her society. And also, a bit of an airhead who is also frivolous. But I think that's okay, because you need to be an airhead because you're discovering all these different parts of yourself and your community. And you're not really tempered yet. Getting your menses, it can be quite painful for some women. Usually it's not as painful as childbirth. And I think that's where like the tempering of women, where like women really become women. And I want to be careful in saying this because you can be a tempered woman without having children.
Yeah.
But like women before and after birth are like different people. Completely different people.
Yeah. And I think we also need to look at like a lot of women are having children later, and there's a lot of women in our society that are not having children or choosing not to have children. And that's an interesting thing of like, how do you move into your mother energy without giving birth? Because there was a time where pretty much every woman gave birth or became some kind of medicine woman, priestess, spiritual kind of woman, and that was an initiation. And so what is the initiation for women who aren't giving birth and who aren't following a path of spiritual service?
I think that's going to have to be individualized, right? What's
Absolutely.
the most important thing, but also what's going to cause a little bit of suffering, what's going to be a little bit challenging for you.
Yeah.
I think that's really important for women to focus on. And also, like, do it with community. Like, women don't give birth on their own. And whether it's a creative birth, whether it's like building a house on your own in the bush, or like going for a massive marathon, or if it's like a career move that you're making, like, don't move by yourself. Make sure you're doing it with people, I think, especially if you're moving into the mother energy.
And maybe for some women, not having children is the pain.
Yeah.
Like not having that. And it's going to be different for everyone. So, yeah, I think that that's something that, like, as we journey through our lives, it's great to think about those stages and where we're at and what is coming up for us around that. And that's a good time to get support. Is when we're going through those big
ideally
changes.
every movement you need support. Ideally, when you get your first bleed, you should have support. When you're giving birth, you should have support, whether that's birth to a creative idea or an outlet of some sort, or an actual baby. And then also when you lose your menses, I think I don't know, like, I think it would cause quite a lot of grief in some way for some women, because they're like, oh my gosh, like, what is this thing that is so foreign? Because we don't talk about these things with each other at all. Like, when my mum lost her menses because she had breast cancer. And she lost it fairly early. And I remember watching her go through such a hard time.
Yeah.
And going through the death of the mother before she was really ready for it. And it happened so fast for her. And, you know, she tried to avoid it in every single way. And then eventually she came to a point where she accepted it, which was really, really beautiful. But I remember being quite young and seeing her go through that and being like, wow, that's really hard. Like, and why aren't we talking about this with one another? Why is my mum alone in this? And it was really painful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of aloneness in these experiences, which makes them harder and less meaningful than they could be. It doesn't mean that having people around is going to stop the pain. But yeah, I think bringing meaning to this is really where the gold is in these initiatory experiences. And that's, that really gives us those gifts to move into the next phase of our lives.
Beautiful. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we close up?
I don't think so.
All right. Miriam McCormack, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.